Hello. I sense your need to hear about a really absorbing biography. Sometimes that is the kind of book you want to pack with you for holidays, or if you're going to spend a long time somewhere and you just want something to absorb, something to really take yourself into. I want to recommend one about a writer, Trollope, by Victoria Glendinning. It's not brand new at all, but that also means that, like me, you'll probably find it in a second-hand capacity and it'll be cheaper to purchase. Now, I would recommend it because his life is absorbing. It's very rich, richly lived, and it all goes along with his stories as you read the biography. He's written about 47 novels, and you'll find that a lot of the stories are based on people he's met, places he's been, because he has been a lot of different places. For example, he lived for a while in Ireland, and I find that really exciting to read where he's talking about buildings being constructed like the university, which I've known just to be there, and he was there when they were being built. The Trollope is often recommended for writers to read and think about, or his way of working, because he was so prodigiously prolific. How did he manage it? And the answer, of course, is his work schedule, that he would get up at 5 in the morning and write for about 3 hours. Then he would go off to his day job, which was working with the post office. Quite often this would involve inspecting different places and how supplies were going, and he would be on a horse riding for a long time or travelling by train long distances. He did this in Ireland, he did this also in England. He had friends he visited in Scotland, and he also had his brother living in Italy, so he tended to get about a bit. A word of caution is to think that he did all this because he had no housework to do. He had servants. His family, his responsibilities were taken care of by his wife largely, and he would scribble out his books and she would copy them out in ink. So he still wrote a lot and he still worked at it, but he had maybe a few less distractions than many of us would have, although he also did a full-time job. And like Nora Ephron, he had a writing mother, and Nora Ephron's mother said to her, everything is copy. And so whenever Nora wrote home from university with letters, her parents would then get that made into a play or a film, and there were just no limits. So everything that happened in life became something that you could make into a story, and it could be made into a public event. And this pretty much is what Trollope tended to do. So what I find interesting was how much he lives with his characters. The business end of being a writer, you're moving scripts around and trying to get publishers, and sometimes things would seem to be a deal and then they wouldn't be, and he had to deal with that because he didn't have an agent. He had to do all the signing of contracts and the negotiations for what he was going to get paid. He had no editor. He had a wonderful idea, an attitude to dialogue in this. I just discussed page 468, where he says that in reality, whenever people are speaking, it tends to be broken up, half-finished sentences, but that you can't quite have that on a page because it's so distracting and incomplete. And so you try and manage it so that it's not like words that have been written rather than said, but yet it gives a hint of the back and forth of a real conversation. He commented that writers of intelligence will want to teach and influence readers, which is a very honest admission. And he had this wonderful phrase for the closeness of the reader to the novelist. He called it the unprecedented intimacy. And I suppose when you're thinking about it, it's one mind speaking to another. So although he lived in Belfast, he didn't like it. He preferred Dublin. And he has left a writing desk at Ulster Museum, which apparently was the one he wrote the Barchester Chronicles on. So probably one of his most famous series and books. And he was so keen on writing, and this is what makes him fascinating to read as a writer. He was so keen on writing that he would write, he thought, even if he didn't get paid. Quote, as long as I can write books, even though they be not published, I think that I can be happy. He was a friend of George Eliot's, so if you like her writing, you might be interested to read them alongside each other. They both liked each other, but Trollope thought, as a writer, that she was a wee bit cerebral, so who knows. Towards the end of his life, he wrote a surprising book, which was called The Fixed Period, and it was a kind of science fiction book, almost. It was about setting an age for euthanasia. The age was set at 67 and a half years old, and at the time he wrote it, he was 66 years old himself. And he passed away within months of that age that he'd stipulated. So Victoria Glendinning in this says that in this story he was inventing 1980s technology. I would actually call it steampunk, possibly. Did he invent steampunk, or was he the first person? Because he wrote about words being transcribed quickly. He wrote about a ship-to-shore communication by phone. And he wrote about a steam tricycle. So, to sum up for this book, I would say that Victoria Glendinning is clear. She refers to the books. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't ever read any of his books, you'll probably get more out of this if you read his books first. Personally, I've read about 5, and I found it fascinating. I suppose at that point I was starting to get interested in the author who wrote the stories, and I was convinced that I enjoyed them. And there's a quote at the start of the book: "The man of letters is, in truth, ever writing his own biography." So that might be a hint to the book itself, that really his life might be a lot in his books, what he's saying. Now, just a cautionary note. He does believe in the supremacy of man over woman, and that women tend to want to be married and settled, which at the time, considering the options that were open to women, there were very, 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 very few. He was Victorian. So there's some leeway in that. But you just need to know that going in. He was a man of his time. And yeah, there's no point in going into this book and saying I want to read a story about a feminist author, because you're not going to find it there. But he's an utterly fascinating individual, and he has written so many books, and I personally find them quite addictive. If I start to read a Trollope novel, it's very, very difficult to put down. And he's outstanding and known for finishing a novel in one day and starting another one the next day. And he kept a sheet of how many words he'd written, and he set himself a goal to write daily. So for all of us who struggle to maybe produce large amounts of work, that was what he did. He just simply set a time and a number of words a day, and then he made sure that he did it. As I say, with far less distractions than most of us have without any servants, thank you very much. But he is just a really interesting person. And when he writes his books, you find him going into the minds and thoughts of either a man or a woman equally easily and absorbing your thinking. And you can find in this, and his letters are referred to in this, they would be really interesting to read alongside, that he would be living with the characters even after he'd finished writing the book that they were in. And in fact, a couple of his books were in series. The Palliser novels follows a particular family, and there's a whole set of the Barsetshire Chronicles which are set in a particular area. And there are recurring characters, and you see them at different stages of their life in those chronicles, and they sometimes pop up in the standalone novels. And you can read them all as standalone. You don't have to read absolutely everything if you've started one of his series, but you probably will want to read on and find out what happens. So, one man who was a prodigious writer and a deep biography you can really settle into. And then, of course, you can always do the detective work, thinking, if you've read his novels or read them, how much of his life and people he met is actually in the novels. Remember the quote. The man of letters is, in truth, ever writing his own biography. So that's my recommendation. Bye for now.